Hello, everyone. Welcome to Careers for Historians in the Tech Industry. This is a conversation we'll be having today about career paths for history PhDs beyond the academy, and specifically in that kind of amorphous world that we call the tech sector. We'll be hearing today from 4 history PhDs working in a wide variety of different kinds of occupational roles within the tech world. And we'll be talking about things like whether or not there are career options for people with PhDs in the humanities in that world. How people can find work in that sector, and how they can contribute to the mission of the various organizations that they might find themselves working for and bring their humanistic skills and historical perspectives to the work that they do. Finally, we'll also be talking a little bit about how graduate students who are currently enrolled in graduate school can use their time while they're working on a PhD or a master's degree to prepare themselves for work in the industry. And then, of course, we'll be fielding questions and, ranging widely across other issues as well. My name is Dylan Riedeger. I'm the coordinator of the AHA's Career Diversity for Historians initiative. The AHA is deeply committed to supporting graduate students and early career historians in their intellectual and academic work, their professional development, and as members of the community of historians. And the political, economic, and epidemiological moment that we are in is one that's really challenging for everyone, but it poses particularly acute challenges for graduate students, early careers, historians, and those who are employed in contingent positions. And the series that this webinar is part of is designed to help provide some support for people in those positions. It also seems to me that the moment that we're in historically helps us to see maybe more than ever how valuable and urgent the project of spreading humanistic perspectives across really the entirety of the economy and society is, not least perhaps in places like the tech world, which plays such a large role in shaping our lives and experiences. And this roundtable discussion is meant to contribute to that. It's the second in a series of virtual career development webinars focused on grad student and early career historians. A full schedule of events for this series, which we'll be adding more to in the coming days, is available on our website. The next event in this series is a roundtable called Making the Most of Your Postdoc, which will be held on October 8th at 2 p.m. Eastern. So please join us for that if you're interested in that conversation. The virtual career development series is supported by the National Endowment for the Humanities and the AHA's Career Diversity for Historians initiative. I'll be turning things over to our panelists momentarily, but just quickly a few words about the format of our discussion. We'll be on for about an hour and a quarter. We'll spend about 40 minutes in conversation with our panelists and then leave ample time for Q&A. As the conversation is happening, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to ask questions, and reserve the chat feature for any technical issues. AHA staff will be managing the incoming Q&A and the chat box throughout the conversation. We're also live streaming this on Facebook Live, and we'll be including live captioning for this event as well. By participating today, the panelists and everyone who's listening has agreed to abide by the AHA's Code of Conduct. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Kalani Craig. Kalani is an assistant clinical professor at Indiana University. And she's also the co-director there of the Institute for Digital Arts and Humanities, where her tech background has come in very handy. Before going to get her PhD in medieval history, Kalani spent 10 years in high tech in Southern California. Kalani, I'll turn things over to you.
Thank you, Dylan. Thank you to the AHA for hosting the panel on behalf of all of us, and especially to Dylan, Megan Connor, Alex Levy, and our closed captioner, Kara. You've done a great job of herding cats, and we very much appreciate it. And particularly, I want to point out that this is, again, being closed captioned, so you can check that out if you do need that support. Our 4 panelists today have careers that have taken them out of the academy and into high tech in very different ways. So I'm going to introduce them all so you can see some of the wide variety of paths that weave back and forth between history and the digital world. And then we're going to do some Q&A with the panelists, and we'll open it up to you, the audience. Our first panelist is Paul Dingman, who currently works at Wiley, where he manages a portfolio of academic journals in the general social sciences and humanities division. He's also worked as a project manager for Early Modern Manuscripts Online, which is a digital humanities initiative at the Folger Shakespeare Library. Paul earned his PhD in history with a concentration in medieval history, go medievalists, at the University of Rochester in 2012. Our second panelist is Andrea Horbinski, who holds a PhD in modern Japanese history with an emphasis in new media from UC Berkeley. Her book manuscript, Manga's Global Century, which I'm going to read now, is a history of Japanese comics from 1905 to 1989. She previously served as the secretary of the board of directors of the ADA initiative, which supports women in high tech. And in her day job, she works for Netflix. Adrian Cates is a user experience researcher at Facebook, where she takes advantage of mostly qualitative research to identify the big issues that face small businesses as they use social media to communicate with their customers. She then helps Facebook's product teams prioritize the features that tackle these issues. Before coming to Facebook, Adrian completed her PhD in history at Georgetown, where she combined historical and anthropological research methods to understand the experiences of indigenous peoples during a commodity export boom in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. Our final panelist is Andrew Keating, and I did go in alphabetical order, so this is no statement about Andrew's place in the panel. He's currently Splunk's head of industry marketing, where he shows how Splunk's data to everything platform can help businesses corral, make sense of, and visualize the variety of data that they have access to in their day-to-day lives. He previously worked at Box, which many of you may use to store your documents, and he's a co-founder of Popcorn RFP, a procurement software service that helps businesses make better decisions about purchasing. Andrew earned his PhD in modern British history from the University of California at Berkeley. So our plan today, because we know that there's a wide variety of understanding of what it means to be in high tech out there in the audience, is to give you a good foundation for asking questions by asking each of the panelists 2 questions about their training as historians and what they've learned about the transition for history to tech in hindsight. And then we'll bring it back to all of you for a Q&A. Again, I'll remind you that there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and I encourage you to use that while we're talking. We do have AHA moderators collecting questions during the panel conversation so that we can get to those questions and answer as many of them as possible during our Q&A period. So first, and in alphabetical order, so I'll cue you a little bit, I'd like to ask each of you to describe a little bit about your day job, what it means to have the title of industry marketing head, for instance, and then talk a little bit about how you got there from a personal angle. We'll start with you, Paul.
Okay, thank you, Kalani, and hello, everybody out there on the panel and everywhere else. First, I want to thank the AHA for having me to this, and it's exciting to talk to everyone. So yeah, my day job currently. So the best title I would give for it is a journal publishing manager. So I'm in charge of a bunch of journals in the general humanities and social sciences portfolio. Those are a wide variety. There are ones in history, which I'm of course I feel a strong kinship to. There's ones in design. There's ones in cultural studies, literature, philosophy, and criminology. So there's a gamut there, but it's very interesting. It's very tech oriented in the sense that most journals now are online. It's where their biggest footprint is, and a lot of my discussions are around the idea of open access, which is this movement in the academic world of putting all of the journals and articles published into the online world so they're available, sort of away from the subscription model that most people connect with journals. So that's kind of writ large. And then there's all these open research practices that go with it. And so how I got into this, I'll get into a little bit with the Folger. I was teaching it as a visiting assistant professor at Alfred University. And that was looking like it might continue, it might not. There were things that were unknown about it. And someone sent me a thing that said, Paul, you should take a look at this job at the Folger. Didn't you do some studying there? This has you all written all over it. And I was like, oh, well, okay. So I sent them a note out of nowhere. And it's one of these things where you don't think anything will happen. And a month later, you get a call out of the blue saying, can you come to Washington, D.C. and talk with us? So, and that led into this incredibly interesting project, Early Modern Manuscripts Online. We were teaching paleography, promoting paleography. This is reading old manuscripts, which is harder than it sounds because spelling is different. There are all these shortened forms. But more than that, we were putting it online. We were taking these old documents, high resolution photographs of them, and then putting the transcriptions of them online in XML with tags that we developed and software we developed to use it to help people learn and to teach paleography. So that was really exciting. We worked with some great partners with crowdsourcing at Zooniverse and with the OED. So we even added some words, or earlier finds of those words. So that was really exciting. Of course, grants, it was a grant supported project. Grants end, sadly, but it sort of set me up for this job because the management, the online stuff with them moving journals to online only, it seemed like a pretty easy transition over to it essentially. Though nothing's easy, of course, but yeah, so there.
Thank you. Andrea, how about you?
Yeah, so thanks for the AHA and thanks to Kalani and all the other panelists and to everybody who's watching. I'm really glad to be here. So my job is, technically my title is, I think, bilingual product writer and editor. So what that means is that I'm on the team that writes the descriptions for all of the movies and shows and episodes on the service. And with my background in Japanese history and specifically with writing my dissertation on manga and also a bit on anime, because anime came from manga, I am on the team that concentrates on the Japanese catalog and sub-team rather, and I'm the editor for the anime titles. So everybody on the team sort of writes, in other verticals as well, as we call them, but that's my primary responsibility. And in terms of how I got the job, while I was doing my dissertation research in Tokyo, I had a friend at the time who is still a translator, and I actually wound up subcontracting for him on some of his translation jobs while I was doing my dissertation research. After I left, he became one of the first contractors that Netflix hired after they launched in Japan. And when they asked him if he knew of anybody else who he thought might be a good fit for the job, he gave them my name. So I actually started this job as a contractor while I was finishing my PhD. And when I did finish my PhD, I was approaching the time limit in California, where now there's this law after 18 months, contractors need to be either offered the position full-time or end the contract. So they offered me the position full-time and I said yes. And I've been in the job ever since.
That's serendipitous, which is one of the themes I think is likely to come out. Adrian.
Yeah, so thank you all for having me. I'm really excited to be here and be part of this panel. I'm Adrian Cates, and as Kalani mentioned, I'm a researcher at Facebook Inc. I don't technically work on Facebook. I work on our chat apps and messaging platforms. And I focus on how small businesses are using our products to communicate with customers, clients, and to grow their businesses on social media. So I think of myself as kind of either an intermediary or a conduit between the actual humans that use our products and the interdisciplinary product teams that build features and make sure that our infrastructure is secure. I work with groups of engineers, product managers, data scientists, and convey to them, the most common use cases, the most common problems that our users are encountering. I then also prioritize with them, help develop solutions for those problems, and then test the solutions and evaluate sort of sentiment over time. So I can plug in at kind of any part of the product development stage, but the thing that I really love the most and that draws on my past experience the most is the more foundational, deep understanding, especially of more international users. So how did I get here? Total good fortune, I would say. I got a cold call when I was writing my dissertation. I was in my last year. And I got a random reach out from a recruiter at Facebook inviting me to a recruiting event. I decided why not. I had no particular interest or expectation of leaving academia, but was totally open to other options. And so I went, and for most of the time I felt totally like a fish out of water. I was the only person there who wasn't super quanty. Like everyone else was a political scientist or an economist who worked with huge data sets, and I didn't know how to do any of that. But at the very end, I spoke to a woman who had done a project on how women are using Facebook in India and why they're creating accounts but not engaging. And I thought about it and I was like, oh, I could do that maybe. And so I submitted an application. I actually submitted my CV, not my resume. I don't even have a resume. And I didn't know this at the time, but the woman I spoke to is actually the head of research at Facebook, and flagged my application. And so after 5 interviews, I got the job, and the rest is history. I've been here about 2 years.
Thank you. Although I'm going to guess that it wasn't just luck that got you the job. It sounds like 5 interviews is a lot. You had to have had quite a variety of skills that were already suited to the industry. Andrew.
Yeah, thank you, Kalani, and thanks again to Dylan and the AHA for organizing and inviting me. Glad to be with everyone. Thank you all for joining. So as Kalani mentioned a few minutes ago, I work at an enterprise software company called Splunk. You may not have heard of Splunk. It's a fairly specialized bit of software that's typically used by IT teams, by security teams, application developers, and the software really analyzes large amounts of machine generated data. So like the logs that come out of a website or a firewall, it's a pretty technical piece of software. Splunk's objective and one of our kind of guiding principles is that we want to help our users bring data, meaning this quantitative machine generated data, to every question, decision, and action. My role, as Kalani mentioned, I lead what's called our industry marketing team. This means that we work on messaging and what's called the go-to-market strategy for bringing Splunk to key industries. So for example, in financial services, all of the transactions that might take place across an ATM network globally, we have a solution where you can use Splunk to have a dashboard and analyze those and detect fraud in those kind of transactions. In healthcare, we're increasingly working with hospitals around monitoring their telehealth. So my team and I really sit between the kind of technical aspects of the software and then how it's used in specific industries, which to me is really exciting and something I'm passionate about. How I got here, I have a background in addition to being a history major undergrad and in grad school, of course, for my MA and PhD. But I also have an interest and background in technology. Some of this is an accident of birth. I grew up in Silicon Valley, and so it was kind of in the water, in the air, as it were. My parents are not in the tech industry, so it was something I kind of picked up and was kind of self-taught around tinkering with technology as I was growing up. So it was always an interest for me. I had done some work here and there, kind of fixing people's computers and things like that, as even going back to high school. But as my postdoc was winding down, I was offered a consulting opportunity, which ultimately led into a full-time role, and then which kicked off this kind of series of events through a couple different roles. This all came about because I sent an email to congratulate my university's CIO on a new role that he was taking. It was announced that he was leaving the university. Then that prompted him to ask me kind of what I was doing next, and offer me this kind of consulting type role. So a bit of serendipity, as I think you've heard from a few others, and as Kalani mentioned, I think we'll talk more about that through the course of the webinar today.
Thanks. So I'll briefly wrap up. I've gone the other direction from the other 4 panelists, but I will also note some of the serendipity. I left my bachelor's degree knowing that I needed 800 million languages to become a medievalist. Spent 10 years learning them, and that 10 years was in the high-tech .com boom in Southern California. And so the time that was afforded me to learn those skills while I was earning money was actually one of my luck things. But I also realized when I came back to the academy that I was much better as an academic because of that high-tech background, and it's led to a number of different opportunities here, one of which was that the position of the director of the center that I run right now vacated completely accidentally. Someone left, and there we were to take advantage of it. So I think one of the things that I want to highlight for our audience as you listen to us tell these stories is that there are accidents that happen to us, and then there are accidents that we take advantage of when we see them. And it's really that I think it was Adrian who, when we were initially talking about these kinds of serendipitous events, that being positioned to see those accidents as positive things, to see those serendipitous events as things that we can draw on and really take advantage of if we've got the right positions and skill sets, is a key piece of all of our stories. So the next thing I think I want to talk about with each of you is about the things that our audience are experiencing right now, the training that they're going through as historians. So what is it that you experienced in your program of studies as a historian at any of the stages at which you are historians, because many of you have been historians in different places, that adapted well to your work in high tech? What kinds of keywords or approaches can our audience keep an eye out for as they come into contact with these kind of training opportunities that would work well as they transition or think about transitioning? And on the other side of that coin, what about hindsight? Are there things that you wish you had done in advance? Are there things you wish you had known? And again, we'll start at the beginning of the alphabet and we'll come back to Paul.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, so I guess two things sort of spring to mind with me. One, first, I feel you with the medieval thing with languages, Kalani. Yeah, so there was Latin and then French and then medieval French, and then we can go from there. But one of the things that was offered to us in our cohort when we started in the medieval program was a course in paleography. And a lot of people, including me, wasn't absolutely sure what that was in the first thing, but I dutifully went to it. When your advisor says, I think this would be good for you, that means go. So I went to that, and it wasn't easy. I don't think it was my favorite thing, but I grew to get better at it. I found interesting things about it. It helped me do my research, but that went off like a big flag when I sent my application for this job. And even someone sending it to me, it was like, Paul, didn't you do paleography? You should look at this. So then I had that, and it was like, well, nobody else has that, or very few other people had that. So that was really helpful because that's what they were doing. And I guess sort of that's a very specific thing, of course. No one could have foreseen that. But the other part is just keep your eye open for other little projects, different kinds of things you can do while in your program, because you just don't know. Also, try to study at different places if you can get the research money to go to. I mean, now nobody can with COVID, but that won't be forever, we hope. But go to some places to study. I actually did some research at the Folger. I was able to do a 2-week thing there. So that introduced me to those people. And I did other ones in other places and other archives and things. Whenever you can take advantage of those things, do, because you'll learn things, but you'll also network, you'll meet people, you will establish a comfort with them, so it wouldn't be as scary, things like that. Aside from that, it's just general research skills, managing data, learning how to sift through things for the important jewels of information. All that kind of stuff is always helpful. Being able to communicate really clearly, all of those things will benefit you in the academy, but also in tech and in other places, because I can pull something together, distill it down, what the software people or the software developer was saying, and talk to the whole class or the whole group meeting in paleography or one of our transcribathons. And people are suddenly, ooh, you can build it up, and then you show them the software and they're like, but they had to be sort of introduced into that a little bit. So you had to have enough of an understanding of it to be able to talk between them. It's like what Adrian was saying, you can kind of bridge the gap there sometimes. So, and I've probably said enough, I'll let somebody else.
Well, Adrian, you just got name checked, so I'll go out of alphabetical order.
Okay, sure. So I've kind of divided this up into things that I wish or things that helped in the application process, and then things that have helped since, and they're overlapping things. And there's also just an innumerable number of things that I could have done better had I known what I was going to be doing with my life. So first, what I think really helped me in the interview process was that some of it had to do with research experience and research methods. So as I mentioned before, I think I did kind of a combination of anthropological and historical methods, a little bit of linguistic stuff too. And it turns out that the anthropology in particular was really helpful just to get me noticed and get my foot in the door, particularly when I was coming from such an unusual background. I was the first person they ever hired with a PhD in history for this role. So to kind of help myself not only stand out, but also help them understand what I could do, it was really handy that I could say I can do ethnography and I can do international. Another thing that helped me both before and since is presentation and storytelling. My job, as I see it, is to make 22-year-old engineers care about humans all over the world, and not just care. I think they do care, but think about it. And in order to do that, you need to be well-spoken, you need to be clear and concise, and you need to be a good storyteller. And that's something that I leveraged in my PhD work, and certainly have done so since. A couple other things that have turned out to be really handy that I didn't necessarily anticipate. Comfort with imperfection. I think this is something that academics, especially as they transition to tech, struggle with a lot. You've got to be okay with having an opinion, even if it isn't like 100% proven and bulletproof, buttoned up evidence, because you have more evidence than anyone else in that room. And that has really served me well. I felt like I was a little bit sloppy at times in academia compared to some of my peers, but being sloppy has been really handy since I've transitioned to tech, or at least being very quick. And then the other thing is being self-directed. This is something that all of us have, but my job is really independent. I do not have a manager who tells me what to do. I find all of my own projects and I lead them end to end. And so in order, to have the background in academia where you're leading your own project for however many years, 7 years in my case, really, really helps when you transition to tech too. They were just, as I said, there's so many things that I wish I had known, and which I thought I knew nothing about the products. I didn't even use Facebook before I came. And so just like understanding the technology might have been handy, but I think that what I've been thinking about since is really like, there are things you can do when you're still in grad school that set you up both for success in an academic career and outside of academia. And an example of this is some of the research methods that I had. It helped me stand apart in grant applications. It helped set me apart on the job market for academia. And it really helped when I was transitioning to tech. So there are other things you can do. I wish I had done a lot more quantitative analysis as a grad student. That would have been super handy now because I'm learning it as I go. And it's the kind of thing that can bolster your application in both fields.
So I'll go back to something you said, the willingness to make mistakes. We talk about pushing buttons and breaking stuff all the time. And I think that's really a key piece of it. And now I'll go back to alphabetical order and we'll bring Andrea to the question.
Yeah, I would really echo what both Adrian and Paul have said in terms of, imperfection and research skills. And along with, sort of being okay with imperfection, also, I think being okay with like your opinion not carrying the day, even if, that like you're right for whatever reason, or you have, more evidence for your position. I think part of working in industry is recognizing that, the team or the company has sort of different priorities and different needs, as opposed to, the ones that we're trained to prioritize in our academic work, and learning to be okay with that. And I think another thing too, specifically with writing, is, learning to let go of the need for perfection in one's writing, and sort of also understanding that having another set of eyes look at your work can always help improve it, and always make, what you're trying to say clearer. So in terms of what I did that was especially helpful in my transition to this job, one of the things I did when I was in grad school was actually I was on an interdisciplinary research team under one of my advisors who joined my exam and then dissertation committee, Gail DeKosnik. And I was working for her as an oral history interviewer and sort of lead researcher on this team. We were interviewing people about their history of doing fandom on the internet in the 80s and 90s and zeros. So Gail wrote a book about this, based on this project. I wrote an article. We co-wrote an article. There were about, I think, 8 or 9 of us, grad students, professors, and then a couple of undergrads as well, both as transcribers and researchers. So, and it lasted for 2 or 3 years. And that was a really fun project. And it also really helped me sort of, learn to work on a team and learned how to sort of talk about things to people, for example, from an engineering background, and learn how to kind of say like, here's a thing that we need to do, and I don't know the technical terms for how we need to do it, in terms of, displaying our results or talking about our results, but being able to sort of communicate across those divides was really helpful. And so that was a real big positive, and also taught me that I liked working on a team. And as much as being a sort of lone researcher, and especially in the dissertation phase, being completely self-directed and writing up, being like, I'm right, and I don't have to, entertain anybody else's arguments in this manuscript because I'm writing it. I do also enjoy working with people, which was something I didn't necessarily realize when I started my program. And in terms of things that I wish I had done, I would also echo a stronger quantitative analysis background. I also have sort of picked a lot of things up as I've gone along, and I do think that, having done a history PhD, you are very capable of reading a quantitative analysis and, grasping the essentials. But I do wish I had a stronger sort of foundation in it, in terms of statistical analysis. So that is something that I do wish I had done at some point, even if it had just been as an auditor in grad school. So yeah.
Thanks. Andrew?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll try not to be too repetitive. Definitely agree with what the others have noted. I will try to add a few additional thoughts in just kind of general terms about what's transferable and what I had from the PhD program that was helpful. I think a lot about kind of project management skills, and this may not be something that everyone really realizes when you're in the throes of researching and writing a master's thesis or a PhD dissertation, but this is actually managing a large scale project, right? You're doing research, you're bringing together multiple components, you're dealing with potentially different readers and incorporating their feedback. And you're at the center of that. You're managing your time, your schedule, your external dependencies. This is really, in the tech industry context, this is a project management exercise, and everybody who goes through a graduate program has that kind of foundation, and you learn that. Similarly, on the teaching side of things, if you actually have put together a course or a syllabus, I had the opportunity to do that as a grad student and then in my postdoc. That too is a different type of project and a project management type exercise. You're pulling together readings, you're thinking about how they fit together, you're thinking about the themes, and this is essentially, it's a different output of, let's say, a business case or a slide deck that we might put together in our jobs in the tech industry. But the sort of work that you're doing and the thought processes that go into it is actually a similar process. Even doing something like, as a graduate student, being a TA or being a reader for a course, if you're doing kind of course management functions and interacting with students in that way, supporting a professor teaching, it's a similar kind of thing. Two other kind of concrete skills that I think helped and that I take away. One of them, so I went to UC Berkeley for both undergrad and grad school. This is a large public university. So just learning how to navigate a large institution and a bureaucracy and understanding how a university works. In my case, my first immediate job's that consulting role, and then going into my full-time job that evolved out of, actually worked very closely with higher ed. So just understanding how a university works, how to navigate the kind of the mix between autonomy and freedom and hierarchy that happens in any kind of large university environment. It turns out that kind of parallels a large organization in the tech industry. Last but not least, in terms of what was helpful, just kind of being able to mix between unstructured and structured time in your schedule. So, being able to kind of be self-motivated to manage your own time to get work done on a writing project or on a research project, but then knowing that you have to be in a classroom at 1 p.m. To teach or to attend a class, and that sort of mix between structured and unstructured elements. In terms of a few things that kind of I wish I'd known or done in advance, or kind of if I knew then what I know now, I would have actually thought a lot more about kind of sort of what we're talking about here today and what all of you attending may be thinking about, which is decoupling my academic training from potential career paths and sort of not thinking of it as a one-to-one that, because I've taught in graduate school, that therefore I will become you know, a teacher. And I kind of came to that by chance, and I wish I'd sort of put more thought into that and kind of actually opened up to be more open to possibilities instead of just sort of having serendipity or something kind of unfold or happen. The other thing I wish I'd known or done is actually thought a lot more about networking and how to make professional connections. I did that with academic conferences, as I think a lot of graduate students do, but thinking more expansively about what a professional network entails that might be beyond simply an academic community, and who I might go to who might work at a company that I might be interested in, and just having that more expansive view of who to talk to and kind of how to network with people, you know, would have been something. It's something that I sort of evolved into, but I wish I would have kind of put some more thought and intention into it when I was finishing up my PhD.
So one of the things that I've heard a lot about in all of your responses that I think I want to tackle, because this is one of the things that I talk about from the other side of this, when we're training folks who are still in the academy to think about what they want to do outside of the academy, is the idea of translation. All of you have addressed it in some way, shape, or form. Adrian's translating for 22-year-old engineers who might not really have that humanistic skill set. Andrea's literally translating, and so is Paul. And Andrew is thinking about the translation and that takes technical language and turns it into marketing language. We've all talked about the idea of having to translate the ways that we describe our skill sets in the academy for use outside the academy in more corporate terms. So I think that's one of the really key pieces of the transition from the academy to the high-tech world, and having a little bit of facility in that, and again, being willing to make mistakes, I think would be the key thing that universities offer, and especially history departments where we are all working with primary sources in many, many languages. We know that, we own that world. So we should really be drawing on it as we think about how we can take those skill sets and reshape them for something new. And I mean, even the basic movement from CV to resume is a translation process. So, you know, let's reshape that and say we're really good at this. So on that note, I think we probably have a good set of background now for people to ask questions, and we've got a lot of questions coming in that fit along a number of different lines. So I'm going to briefly sort of sketch those out, and then I'm going to throw it to the panelists. This is where we start interrupting each other. We've seen a lot of questions about ethics in high tech and industry. We've seen lots of questions about the kinds of historical thinking skills, not just the soft skills that we take away from research, but the things that we actually learned about manga or medieval bishops. Do we still get to use those, and how do we get to use those kinds of things to tell stories? I'm seeing a lot of questions about how we onboarded our tech skills, and how we keep them and our history skills current at the same time. And I'm also seeing a lot of questions about the networking question that Andrew brought up, both how it has to do with finding leads on jobs, and also how it shapes the way that we behave in our academy lives so that we can effectively communicate and work well in an industry world. So let's throw out the first one, the really easy one, about ethics. That question reads, as humanists, have you run into serious ethical dilemmas about working in tech and for large companies? And if so, how do you manage them?
Well, I'm glad to jump in on this. I've experienced a bit of this actually in my previous role. And I really applaud the AHA, by the way, for offering captioning for this webinar, because accessibility is a big issue in tech. And so in my previous role, you know, I was in a different sort of role than I have today, and I heard feedback from a lot of university customers around the need to have technology that's accessible. And so that was something that I did. You know, went to product teams, went to executive teams, essentially had to make a business case for inside the company. And, you know, I was able to do that because this is the corporate world, and it was a sort of dollars and cents calculation, but it was also about like hey, we really need to do this. Like, our users are asking for this. This will help us make a better product that delights our users. So it wasn't fully this kind of pure dollars and cents calculation. It was also this kind of, we want to do the right thing and we want our users to really enjoy and be delighted with our products. In my current role, you know, it's actually, my team and I are very fortunate in that we get to sort of think about how our software is used to help organizations with, you know, critical needs. So, you know, I mentioned one example around telehealth. We've had a customer, and unfortunately I can't name the organization, but they have used our software to actually ensure that more people are connected to physicians for telehealth appointments and that calls are not dropping as much as they used to be. So we actually get to feel good about the way that our software is actually contributing to this very lived human personal experience. So I think the one general point I would say, and then glad to hear from the others what they think, is that everybody kind of needs to think about this at a very personal level about what the work is that you'll be doing at a given company, what the company's objectives are. So these kind of considerations exist on multiple levels, and everybody kind of navigates this for themselves with a lot of different you know, a lot of different issues that come up in terms of what the company's products are, what your role is, how much change you can impact, and this changes over time as well.
So I see Adrian's finger on her mute button, but I screwed up in the interest of fronting push buttons until it breaks, and forgot to remind everyone that there is a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and that we are taking questions still. And now I will go away and Adrian can answer the question.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine that in no small part this is with my employer in mind, and it's certainly something that I, you know, have to grapple with. Mostly, I'll say, from the people around me, and not something that I struggle with particularly much internally, and that's for a couple of reasons. First, that I really believe in the part of the company that I work on. These companies are enormous, right? And you can be seated in any number of roles. And not only do I believe in the work that I'm doing, but actually believe in the products that I'm working on. So, you know, don't think of it as just like one big behemoth. There are lots of little branches and lots of teams within some of these big companies. But I think maybe more importantly, I feel that if I weren't there, right, they wouldn't be thinking about these problems. If they didn't have a researcher who was communicating the needs of actual humans, who was speaking for the little guy, then all they would have to work with was behavioral data. And that tells a really incomplete story. So I think my role is really important. I take it really, really seriously. And by being there, I have a seat at the table, a voice in the room, and I've stopped some things from happening that I was really opposed to because I had, you know, because I was there. And that wouldn't have happened if I didn't have the opportunity to have a voice in these conversations.
So you really are kind of changing the world in some ways.
Yeah, one little teeny feature at a time.
Well, it's sort of the best we can do.
I can jump in for a little bit. So it's a great question. And it takes all these different forms. I mean, I like what Adrian said, there's all these little parts of all of these corporations. I mean, with the Folger, when we did paleography, we had lots of people contributing transcriptions. So the idea was you'd get multiple transcriptions, you'd compare them to each other with the software, and you'd come up with the best one. So part of your thing was saying we use everyone's transcription, you know, everyone contributes. But of course, you know, everyone's equal, some are more equal than others. So we had to sort of get comfortable with that. It's like, well, everyone is contributing. However, you know, we can't help it that it's a little lopsided here. But you sort of had to understand that, and it wasn't a huge thing, and we did use everybody. So there were degrees of it, perhaps. At Wiley, you know, there are things, I would echo kind of like some things you can put a stop to, as Adrian was saying, like, well, what about this? Or no, I don't think we should do that because I know they'll say this. I can use some of my role playing and my understanding of the academy to like, I don't think that's going to go over very well. Now, as Andrea said, you can get overruled, and you have to get comfortable with that. People, you know, you have to understand a company is trying to make money. So there has to be some understanding of that. But there are these moments where you feel like you can make a difference. And at the Folger with some of these transcribathons that would grow to like 100 people, and people would just show up saying, what's going on here? We heard something cool is happening. And someone who'd never tried paleography got in front of a screen and tried it. I mean, they're not going to get that in a classroom. So that was very exciting. At Wiley, when you can promote an issue beyond, we did something on museum leadership for a museum journal, and we got pickup through promotions to get it to in front of more faces than they would ever have gotten with their regular subscription. So that's sort of a win there. And I'll close this part with, I always remember being at a conference talking about crowdsourcing and kind of debating this one person who was talking about all of the gamification options to get people to contribute in this crowdsourced environment, and we give them these points and this points, and we really feel like we can, and more power to him. I mean, I think that's great, but I tried to tell him, like, well, we didn't do that with the Folger. We found people enjoy just learning. And I think you're leaving that out of you're leaving the human dimension there out of your calculus. And there was a moment where people just like nodding, oh yeah, I mean, people love to learn that stuff. And computers don't get that same pleasure factor like that, from learning. So there were moments like that, and these little things that you try to work on. And the times when you get overruled or you disagree with something, well, that'll come around again. Maybe you can make a difference with it the next time.
Yeah, I would echo what people have said about needing to sort of work this out for yourself personally, but I also kind of want to push back against this notion that like working in the academy is ethical and working for a company isn't. Like, when I was finishing my PhD the last year or so was when the Me Too movement was really sort of kicking off. And at Berkeley in particular, there was this string of newspaper stories about really high profile sexual harassment cases. And it got to the point where, I would say to Gail, like, oh, this one's worse than normal. And it was never any of the ones that I was expecting to hear about. Some of the ones I was expecting to hear about still haven't made the papers. So, and I think, especially in the time of coronavirus, it also doesn't take, a lot of digging to find examples of universities behaving wildly unethically on a number of levels. So I just want to kind of flag that, that there is no kind of ethical labor under late capitalism. And honestly, too, that was sort of one of the things I was thinking about as I was, becoming increasingly clear that I wanted to leave when I finished, because, in my field in Japanese history, the number of jobs has grown increasingly small over the past, 10 or 15 years. And, it was sort of, it was a concern I had even as a grad student of like, is it ethical for this program or for programs in general to keep accepting people at the same rate, and prepare them for jobs that aren't there at these, poverty wages. So that was a thing that I was thinking about. And in some ways, going to work for Netflix was actually like, a much easier decision. Like, I am working on a product that shows people entertainment they like. Which is not to say that, there haven't been controversies about Netflix shows. And I think, everybody can think of one, off the top of their head, depending on what you watch and what parts of the internet you hang out on. But I mean, I have been encouraged by the steps, that Netflix has taken sort of specifically in this past, it's September, 3 or 4 months in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement. And I have been proud to sort of, contribute my 2 cents in internal discussions at various points. So yeah, I mean, I think, again, yeah, I just want to say, like, universities, maybe not always, a sterling example of ethical behavior.
And I think that's an amazing point. I just want to come in on that really briefly. So totally agree with what you just said. The part I would want to kind of highlight is that I think it speaks to this sort of this kind of normalization of like the academic career trajectory as the sort of normal default one. So therefore, by definition, there are no ethical considerations. We're just not going to look at that, right? So I think the ethical question is going to come up no matter if you stay in the academy or if you decide on a different career path. And it's really something that you have to look at the circumstances of the organization or institution or company. You have to look at the role and specifically what you're doing. And it's incredibly important to realize that you're making a choice staying in the academy just as much as you might be making a choice to leave the academy.
I think the key there is that, and this has come up again, right? That the question of luck versus taking advantage of something that appears in front of you. I think that the really key piece of this is that the decision needs to be an active decision and seen that way, not just as something that happened to you, but as something that you do intentionally. And I know a lot of programs are making decisions that are better designed to support their graduate students in that way, but it's not always clear. One of the questions we do have, I'm going to skip down a couple and ask how your peers, your advisors, your supervisors have supported or not supported the kinds of decisions that you made about your careers, and how you have communicated to them both during the process and after the process, because that's come up a couple of times. And then I'm going to come back to some of the more practical stuff so that we can get the higher level fuzzy questions out of the way. How do you feel about your department now? And
Well, I'll say quickly, I'm still in touch with a lot of people from my, the medieval group, and some of the others as well, but a lot of it's through Facebook or some of the other social media things. I mean, I'm not actively going to the conferences they're going to, which, you feel a pang once in a while, but it's still nice that they'll ask me to some things. And I did get to go to one a couple of years ago, and it was like we did a Festschrift for a professor. So there are things I can still stay involved with, but somewhat of that is because I have to sort of have a foot in both worlds still with the academic journals and at the Folger, so I could sort of do that, but I'm not teaching actively like they are. So it's certainly different. I also get emails from my advisor once in a while. I think somebody else said this once in our planning, they'll tell me about a job or something. And it's like, well, that's okay. I know I'm probably not going to get that. But you mentioned too, like these decision points. I remember specifically very vividly being at the Folger when, for one of the interviews, I think the interview when I went down there and talking to the library director person who I didn't even think I was going to meet. And he said to me like, so you're taking a different path here. And I don't think until that moment I had made that connection in my mind. And I was like, yeah, because I said, if I'm meeting you, I'm probably going to get this job, and you've been through the phone interviews and the other things, but up until that moment, it was like, oh, yeah, I guess I am. So those will sneak up on you, but I think it's still a cordial thing. I don't feel like I've been, I'm like the black sheep or something, but it's like, oh, well, Paul's doing something else, it's like that. But I think it's still positive. I'll let the others give their views.
Yeah, in my experience, so I had one, as my postdoc was finishing and I got offered this consulting role, my immediate advisor is incredibly supportive, fantastic people, and I had generally a very supportive environment overall. I did have some feedback from people I knew in the academic world that were telling me like, don't take this job, because it would kind of make it harder for me to apply to tenure track positions or other postdocs or things like that. And I think they acted with good intent. So I'm not looking back on this saying like, oh my gosh, there was something nefarious going on. But looking back on it now, that range of like unsolicited advice to turn down a good paying job at the point when like my postdoc was literally ending and, I needed the money to provide for myself, like it's kind of a crazy sort of thing. I think they acted with good intent. I also had some people that told me they were coming up with all sorts of creative ways where I could like teach a class and be doing work in the tech world. And again, I think there was good intention here, but I had to kind of filter that out. And that was a little bit tough to basically to say no, to kind of go against or to close a door at first kind of slightly in my case, and then sort of more fully as time went on. And that's tough because I'm still really passionate about history, my research, really enjoyed teaching. So it's tough to kind of, sort of shut that door. But there comes a point where you kind of have to, because you can't really do 2 full-time jobs. Some people have to, but it's not easy and it's not ideal to do that.
Yeah, everything that that Paul and Andrew said so far really resonates with me. I've also had that experience of, you know, continued sort of outreach about academic opportunities. I actually turned down some academic opportunities to take the job in tech. And I think that for me, there's been this kind of a problem of framing, which maybe goes back to what Andrea was saying before about like the ethics of working in a university. When I was deciding on what I wanted my life to look like, I maybe was considering different variables than some other people at the time. Like I wanted a steady paycheck. I wanted to be in one place for more than a year or two. I wanted to be in a place that was desirable, where I could meet other people and make friends and have fun on the weekends occasionally. So those were all really important considerations to me. And while I had an awesome experience in grad school, I loved it end to end, but then I felt like I could find some of the things that I loved about grad school somewhere else. The problem is, I think that a lot of folks in academia just don't know what's out there, what's possible, and what success can look like outside of an academic context. And so when I get these kinds of, you know, I think very well-intended outreach still sort of connecting me to academic opportunities, my guess is it's more a consequence of just not really understanding what I do and that it's fulfilling. And second, maybe still this expectation that, you know, academia is the only way, and it's the only thing that a lot of people know. So how could they really advise anything else? I will say though that internally, like, yes, it's a hard decision to make. I don't really feel those pangs that Paul was mentioning. I really miss the faculty that I used to work with closely, just because I really love them as people. But I don't feel those pangs. And the reason I don't feel those pangs is because I am getting that same level of fulfillment that I got when I was doing my dissertation. I'm doing a lot of the same things. I'm still doing really autonomous work. I'm still doing really interesting work. I'm learning new things all the time, whether self-taught or from, you know, my coworkers who have diverse skill sets. I'm still getting to do a lot of international stuff, and I'm still getting to do a lot of the kind of teaching and storytelling that I cared a lot about as a grad student. So there's definitely a path outside of academia where you still get those kind of enriching and fulfilling experiences without having to then give up on some of the other things that at least were important to me about more sort of quality of life.
Yeah, I would really echo what Adrian just said about the quality of life concerns. That was one of the reasons that I was not very wild about sort of pursuing a fistful of postdocs. I really liked living in the Bay Area. I still do. I still live here. I still bike to the Berkeley campus on the weekends to use the databases on the internet, actually. I think I'm sort of a little unique here in that I am still kind of maintaining a research career. I've written a couple of articles since I finished my PhD, and I'm still working on getting the book published. So, and I think, you know, I want to say, like, one of the reasons I'm still working on it is because ever since I started talking about my dissertation topic, well before I'd ever written it, you know, people, not just in the department, but also, you know, sort of random people I talk to would be like, a history of manga, I'd read that. And I'd be like, I see. So that was a huge encouragement at the time and going through the whole process. And I think one thing too about sort of anime and manga studies is that it has sort of had a lower barrier to participation. There's not really sort of any one university that has a monopoly on it. And a lot of people who write in it are sort of contingent, or, you know, they have been professors and now they're not, or they, you know, they never were professors and they're just sort of very interested amateurs. And one thing I've done is continue my association with the Macadamia Journal, which I started working for actually before I went to grad school. I became the sort of lead copy editor person after I got back from a Fulbright fellowship. So that's been 12 years now and counting. And I've worked my way up to submissions editor, and I was this guest editor for one of the issues earlier this year. So yeah, I mean, I think in terms of my relationship with my former department, I think you know, there were, I think, people at the time while I was doing my program who were sort of a little more like, why would you want to leave? But now that it's sort of 2020, I think it's very clear to everybody, not only that, you know, a lot of people have good reasons for wanting to leave, but also that, you know, it's not sustainable to expect that everybody can stay. Yeah, and I've talked to, I've done a couple of career events at my old department, and you know, everybody there is still sort of is very supportive when I say hi. And I still do exchange emails with my advisor, and sometimes, you know, we meet for coffee or whatever. So she's great. So yeah, I mean, I think you can have kind of, it's still possible to sort of stay connected to some extent, depending on what you're doing. And I would also say too, like in terms of what Adrian has said about, you know, the parts of the graduate school aspect that you liked that you do now. I mean, I think it's very important to think about what parts of it you like best. I was always very clear that I was never a huge fan of teaching. I don't think I was ever better than a sort of solid B as an instructor. I wasn't horrible, but I wasn't amazing. And I had a lot of friends in my program who were sort of much more emotionally fulfilled by it. And not surprisingly, you know, they have found ways to sort of stay in as instructors, as teachers, and they're really good at it. And they were good at research too. But for me, writing and researching was always the thing I liked best. So, and I liked working with adults. So, you know, having this job, I think really sort of, you know, plays to those strengths. And then, you know, I am able to sort of take my surplus time and do with it what I like. And some of what I like is to write books. So, which again is also a thing that predated grad school in some ways. So, you know, I think part of it you have to sort of figure out, you know, what is most important to you and really sort of try to work to prioritize that and recognize that, like, I think, you know, these days there isn't one sort of job that is going to fulfill sort of all of your needs, and just sort of figure out like which needs are most important and what you have to go elsewhere to find.
I think I'd add to that the idea that we sort of idealize the job. And we imagine it's going to be perfect. And I will say, with 10 years of high tech and now 10 years of the academy, roughly speaking, evenly split between my careers, there are days when I hated high tech and days when I loved it. There are days when I hate my current job and days when I love it. And I think the real balance, and I would, you know, I think the key piece of this here as you're digesting this in the audience is that each of our experiences are very different. We all have very different jobs in terms of what we balance and the skill sets that we draw on and put together. But the things that we're all saying are, figure out what you like and find a job with that balance, because you're going to be the only person with that balance literally in the whole world in some cases. And, you know, that's not a bad thing. I think Paul points out that paleography, which is a really weird, obscure skill in the broader academy, maybe not for medievalists, but that was his entree into a really broad career path. Those are the kinds of moments that we're, you know, we have to be willing to balance that a little bit and to look for the moments that we like and prioritize them. I also think, and I will say, I Facebook stalked and internet stalked all of you. I note that Andrew is currently the one of several people who are highlighted on UC Berkeley's page as having gone outside of the academy. There's a profile about a PhD leaving the academy. I know IUB's history page has that also, and these are new-ish for us, at least. I don't know how it is for Berkeley in the last year. So I think some of the responses for faculty members getting these kinds of questions in the last 12 to 18 months has changed pretty dramatically. The students that I'm advising here who are looking for jobs outside the academy initially come and say, I'm really worried about how people are going to respond. I'm worried that they're going to say the kinds of things that Andrew and Adrian noted. And the responses that they get after they have that conversation don't align. And I think that that is a really encouraging thing. So, you know, if you're in the audience thinking, oh my God, I can't do this, I can't ask, the only thing that they can say is, maybe you should consider a tenure track job, and then you can say no to that. There's really no downside at this point. So on that note, like, these are the scary things. These are the interpersonal and career-oriented things that worry us as academics who are looking at taking that academic training elsewhere. But there are also a lot of practical questions we're getting. So I want to shift us to think about specific quantitative research skills, specific tech skills that you have that have been really valuable to you and how you got them. Did you learn them on the job? Did you learn them on your own, off the job, before the job? Is there on-the-job training that's made available to you? How are you balancing that?
I can take
Well,
a
maybe.
stab.
Well, let's
Oh
go
yeah,
with,
go ahead.
Andrew, you can go.
Yeah, so I mean, these are kind of tactical questions, and I'm happy to follow up with anyone who's interested for more detail. The very short answer is that most of it has been ad hoc on the job training. At least my employer does provide some internal resources. So we have like an ongoing series of classes that we teach each other. And, you know, I taught one on sort of ethnographic research methods. Someone else taught one on statistics and survey science. So you can take them internally, but they're quick. I also do a lot of like Coursera. I'm taking like a stats for survey analysis class right now. But I also learned, and this is maybe very particular to me, that I'm really interested in language. I did a bunch of, I speak Yucatec Maya. That's like what I did my interviews in for my dissertation. And it turns out that coding is just like learning a language. So I just like took an interest in it, and it sort of really spoke to me. So I've on my own done quite a bit of, I'm learning like SQL and R, and not just out of curiosity, but also then it makes you quite self-sufficient. So an example of this, SQL is a language that basically aggregates data and can pull it. And learning that made it just super easy for me to recruit participants, for example, for a study. So I kind of figured out very quickly what I needed to do in order to make myself as autonomous and also as sort of flexible and able to answer any question as possible, and have spent a fair amount of time just sort of on my own, and also relying on the skills of other people at the company to learn from them. And one thing I'll just quickly note here before I hand it over to Andrew is I was hired to be basically an ethnographer in tech, right? I was hired as a qualitative researcher, but the way that these teams are structured, I just basically have to answer any question that the product team has, or that I have about our products and our users. And not every question can be answered equally well with qualitative methods. And so I learned quickly that if I wanted to be able to rise to the occasion and answer any challenge, then I had to learn these other skills. And it's been, you know, a little bit of a slow process, but I'm much more self-sufficient and also much more, have a much wider skill set than I did when I started.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of that. I would also kind of note that I feel like I'm probably like the least quantitatively inclined of the folks on the panel here today. So I think there is a tendency to equate tech with something that's either quantitative or writing code or programming. I want to note that like there's a range of career options in tech. You know, I'm more on the marketing side these days. There are customer success type roles where, you know, you're not going to really be expected to have a quantitative skill set. So if we think more broadly about learning skills, I like Adrian's point about languages, right? This really is a different language. It might be a language of business. It might be a language of marketing. It might be a language of enterprise software as opposed to, you know, other aspects of the tech industry. So you really do want to think about skills generally and how you pick those up. The good news is that it's kind of never been easier. I mean, it sounds kind of cheesy to say, but there's so many online courses available. There's so many self-paced things that you can do. And obviously everybody's crunched for time. So the real challenge, I think, ends up being kind of how to balance all of you know, your obligations that you might have as a graduate student or postdoc with sort of picking up and training some of those other skills that you might want to sort of position yourself for a career or for a different kind of job. The final point I'll make too is I want everyone to kind of realize that when you come into a job in the tech industry, like as Adrian mentioned, you're going to have a lot of training resources available. Like my current role at Splunk, like nobody expected me to come in knowing how Splunk software worked. They asked me some questions in the interview about kind of knowing at a high level what the company does, and I'd done my research, and so I knew that. But then once I started, There's a number of training options available. I've gotten up to speed on kind of how our product worked. I've used our product, things like that. So you're not expected to come in and be an expert on day one, unless it may be something like if you're hired to write code, you probably do need to know how to do that. So you really just need to unpack this a little bit and not imagine that it's this daunting, you have to spend, many, many years learning some quantitative skills in order to get a job in the tech industry.
I just want to really quickly jump in here because I think, Andrew, what you said really makes sense. And I want to note that I was so excited to talk on this panel in part because you guys still have time in many cases. Like I'm having to do this on my own as I go, although I enjoy it. I don't find it a burden. But what I wish I had done is taken a stupid math class when I was in grad school, or just, take a class outside of my department. Again, I was fortunate because I had an interest in language and anthropology. So I did some of that on my own. But you all can do that a little bit more intentionally and a little bit more systematically. And as Andrew noted, I was hired as a qual researcher, not a quant researcher. I want to be conversant so that I can do whatever is needed. But the vast majority of what I do was building on my current skill set. I didn't have to start from scratch when I started.
So I'm going to hop in and say, find someone like me at your current university. If you are late in your career, find the one-year fellowship that they offer grad students where they do one-on-one meetings with you a couple of times a semester. If you're early career, find a class taught by someone that says digital history or stats or computational linguistics, because the kinds of things that Adrian is talking about are accessible, and many of them will roll into your degree if you work with your advisor to do that. And then I'll let Paul and Andrea talk.
Yeah, so one thing I would recommend to people, and I did too, there are a lot, and this is growing, there are a lot more of these digital humanities initiatives now. A lot of archives are digitizing their collections. And my program now at the U of R, they have like a digital humanities like mini program, and so that's added like since I was there, and I wasn't there that long ago. So I think that is blossoming because also there's funding for these kinds of things, which leads to how, the grant position at the Folger too. So look for those, whether they're at your university or if they're elsewhere, because there are crowdsourcing things that people can just hop on and you can get involved in it that way. And most of them, if not all of them, will have some kind of teaching component with them to kind of help people along to be more useful and gain knowledge from it. Before I went back to get my PhD, I did some technical writing because I had an undergraduate degree in English. So that was a way I was working. And through there, I sort of taught myself some things with how I was explaining how things worked. So I picked up how databases worked, for instance. And also, as Adrian was saying, when I was at the Folger, they'll see what you have, and then there's opportunities where they can help train you too. So I went to like an XML class or something like that, which I knew a little bit about, but then I went to a 2-day thing and then I knew a lot about it. So that helped a lot with it.
I'm gonna move us to Andrea since we're just about out of time, and I wanna make sure that she gets to talk about her specifics, and then we'll have Dylan help us wrap up and talk about how we can follow up with some of the existing questions that are still on the blocks.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Paul actually about the DH stuff. It was getting started when I was in grad school. I spent a year as the digital history coordinator, bridging the history department and the sort of emerging DH center. That was a really good way to sort of get exposed to a bunch of technical stuff, some of which I already knew through my sort of work with the ADA initiative and then the stuff that had brought me to the ADA initiative. But that's, definitely a great way to kind of get exposed to ways of thinking about historical skills in a technical context, and also sort of being exposed to like, maybe you'll really love R, maybe you'll learn, maybe you'll like really get into data visualizations. I took a class on data visualizations and graphing software with a guy who then started working for Netflix, doing the same thing. So, yeah, there's a lot of opportunities, and I would echo too the cross-training that Adrian said. I did a DE, a designated emphasis in new media, and that required me to do some stuff outside of the history department, which I wouldn't have done otherwise. And I was the only historian in a lot of those classes, so that was also sort of a good opportunity to get exposed to other ways of thinking, and also to have to explain what I was doing to people who didn't understand history and wanted to know why I wasn't in film studies. So yeah, I mean, I think there's resources on campus, also cultivating, people who aren't on campus, like Andrew mentioned earlier, trying to sort of resist the grad school tunnel vision, I think, is a key thing. And yeah, too, like once you get a job, you know, the company wants to train you. They don't expect you to know everything, you know, especially I think at a lot of tech companies are very into like their culture. And so like, you know, they're like, you have to learn our culture and be part of our culture. So that will come with a lot of sort of, you know, not only sort of talks about your coworkers and the atmosphere of the company, but also like specific platforms and, you know, specific tools that they use. So yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm going to turn things back over to Dylan.
Yeah, I think that place that we ended about talking about the opportunities that a university presents to grad students to explore a wide variety of experiences and develop a wide variety of skills is a really useful place to kind of conclude. For those of you who have hung on to the end here, the HA offers a number of resources to help graduate students as they try to navigate what we call using the whole university. If you're interested in those, some of them can be found at the AHA's Career Diversity for Historians webpage or by contacting folks like me at the American Historical Association. We're out of time today. I'd like to thank Kalani and Andrea and Andrew and Adrian and Paul for participating in this really exciting conversation. This was super fabulous. We had lots and lots of questions we didn't get to. If you're among those, we're going to be sending up some follow-up emails, and we'll do our best to try to direct you towards people or resources that can answer some of the specific questions that came in. So look for a follow-up email if you've registered for this webinar. And thank you everyone for coming. And most of all, thank you for the panelists. This was great. And I hope everyone enjoyed it. I know I did.
Thank you so much. This was amazing.
Bye.